All right, guys, thanks again for watching another episode of the Igor podcast. This week, or this episode, we have Kelli and Michelle back on, and we're pretty much talking about powerlifting for a good chunk of it, just because that's something that we all hold near and dear to us. So we decided to do a big episode on powerlifting for the most part. We talk about a couple other things. I hope you guys enjoy as usual. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, and give us a rating, especially on iTunes as well. Go ahead and check it out, and I hope you enjoy as usual.
Okay.
Oh, fix that. There you go.
I'll edit
Cut that out.
Probably not. Probably won't edit that. All right. Welcome back, everybody,
What's up, guys?
to the Agora podcast. We're here today again with Miss Kelli Michelle.
You guys didn't notice we really like Kelli.
I am really light. Yes. Is that what you said?
No, we said we really like Kelli.
They like me, and I'm very light.
Two shows, and we've had her on for 2 seminars, so we really like Kelli.
Today's episode, we're talking about Kelli's whiteness.
She is actually
I'm glowing
a
over
stand-in
here.
for one of the White Walkers in Game of Thrones.
Oh, man.
for the White Walker, yes.
I'll take that. I'm going to take that. Game of Thrones.
So, topic of discussion today. I know Kelli wanted to come back on to talk about powerlifting, the ins and outs of it, and then also women in the gym, women weightlifting. Let's just go ahead and dive into it. So first off, I wanted to talk about powerlifting as a sport, and I feel like people think powerlifting is like this thing where you just have big, crazy, jacked ass people lifting heavy weights, screaming their faces off. Why? So Jay is a powerlifter. Kelli, you can answer this as well. Why should people do powerlifting? Why should people powerlift?
Well, I think so. A lot of our
Is
audience
there more
gonna
to it than just lifting your face off?
Yeah, absolutely. I think since a lot of our audience also does, they also compete in the aesthetic sports. I think there's a lot of value in doing powerlifting, or not even competing, but just doing the powerlifting movements, the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, or in just general the squat and the deadlift, because everybody benches.
Yeah. There's always Monday.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of value in incorporating those barbell-based movements, just because, everybody always talks about when you pick your exercises for bodybuilding, you get the exercises that you get the most bang for your buck. Mm-hmm. And those are going to be, your squat, your bench, and your deadlift, just because, one, they allow you to use the most weight. Two, they incorporate a ton of different muscles. So as opposed to just machines where maybe you're using one or two, you're incorporating a ton of different muscles doing the barbell-based movements. Mm-hmm.
What about for the average person that isn't already competing?
That's actually what I was going to lead into was because I primarily used powerlifting on myself to show the girls that I was training that I wasn't going to grow in the waist, I wasn't going to grow in the hips, I wasn't going to have these monster-sized legs, but as opposed to what I was working with, which was a frame that did not have a lot of muscle mass on it and definitely had more fat mass, I wanted to become stronger. I still wanted to look aesthetic. And I wanted to prove to these girls that the way to do that was to lift differently.
Yes. And
to do the accessory work, because that's where I think a lot of people don't understand powerlifting. Either you don't just do squat, bench, and dead.
Yeah.
Your programmer has you do accessory work that will accentuate those periodizations, and then the accessory work will change to, different...
cover either your strengths or your weaknesses.
Right. And so I think a lot of women think that powerlifters all look a certain way too, because a lot of powerlifters do decide to stay in a heavier weight class.
Yes.
Because size versus weight, people...
Let's not sugarcoat it. Powerlifters are fat.
Well, yesterday when I was lifting, I'm like, I need to do more conditioning so I'm not a fat power lifter. And Rigo thought that was so funny. He's like, oh my gosh, no more conditioning.
Well, you're already lean enough.
You are already lean enough, right?
No, you can be a jack power lifter, and Jay here is a great example.
Well, and all of the girls that I was training were like, we want to do this too. Yeah. You're looking so good.
I think a lot of you use this with a lot of your female clients. I think what they realize is that The barbell movements gives them a good foundation, like gives them a good
Yes.
foundation of muscle mass.
Absolutely.
Core.
And then when you do the accessory work, that's when you start to accentuate each individual part.
Right.
But doing the barbell-based movements kind of gives you an overall base of muscle
Right.
in general.
Well, and it also helps like hone in your foundational movement patterns.
Yeah.
So when you go do these crazy accessory workouts, I feel like less prone to injury because you know how to do a basic squat, a basic jump, or pressing, or anything like that.
Right. And I think it's a lot easier too with powerlifting to gauge your expenditure so that you can hone in on the nutrition aspect of it if you want to, and you can bring in powerlifters that are very deceptive by weight. I had one powerlifter in particular who was 4'11" and weighed about 103 pounds, and pound for pound she lifted more than my girls that were 165.
Yes, a lot of the highest Wilks that we see in the sport
Are tiny.
And for those who are not familiar, Wilks is how it's our scoring system for powerlifting. So the higher your Wilks score is, the better you are in the rankings, and Wilks is what will allow you to qualify for the world level competition.
Right.
It's essentially like pound for pound strength. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's pound for pound strength. It's your relative strength.
Right.
Yep.
So then I saw, and all of this really started back with Bret Contreras when we started.
Shout out to Bret.
Yeah, shout out to Bret. Back in 2013, I had a group of girls that I was training out of Scott's Training Systems that agreed to buy 6 sessions with Bret, and they loved it so much they ended up keeping their training sessions for several months. And we'd go up there in hopes that Bret could even build a stronger foundation. But those girls, several of them stayed at STS, and then 2013 and 2014 was when they were like, hey, what if we have a powerlifting team? Would you coach us? And I'm like, yeah, I will coach you. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to go to this raw competition and we're going to get smoked, right? But all of my girls were under 145, and we ended up winning the competition. We won a team award too.
Did your girls also win best overall lifters?
Yes, they
Wow.
did. And it was really amazing because one of my lifters who was not a very strong lifter, and we were actually talking about this today, aesthetically, she is my most changed person ever. She had a huge lower half, which we had to triple train all the time just to get her lower half to look like the upper half, which the upper half was very, very small. Powerlifting changed her entire, it's almost like when she started powerlifting, that's when everything took a turn aesthetically for the better. And she's absolutely stunning. She looks like a fitness model, but 7 years prior to that, you would have been like, what? Do you even lift? And so I was able to use her as a platform a lot to say, hey, ladies, you are all coming to me from Ashley as a referral. Do you know what she did to get there? Yeah. And she actually got second place, and we never thought she would even place like in the top 3. So the day of the meet is like so different. You've never lifted what you lift in the meet a lot of times in practice. Yeah. Your starting weight might be your first confidence builder lift.
Yeah, your opener will usually is what gets you in the competition.
And I remember looking after my second deadlift, at which I looked across the room and there was Bret Contreras. He was standing in the very back, and I was like, okay, I'm going to PR again. And then I did, and I remember I felt so accomplished because Bret was like, man, Kelli, you just stick with deadlifts. Just stick with deadlifts and
stick with all your hinging.
And do not squat. Because, that's what powerlifting, I think, is so wonderful for, is you have all these athletes powerlifting, and you're like, you're a great squatter. Why? Look at your levers. What? Look at your feet. They're actually really good for this, and your knees are this, and your tibia length is here, and your foot positioning. Yeah. And then you have people that are really good squatters, and we all just sit there like, yeah, I wish I was that, So usually the good squatters are not very good at bench or deadlift. So everybody has one lift.
Straight to the heart. I'm not very good at deadlift.
Yeah, right?
Mediocre bench.
So we all have one area that we are like, oh, this, right?
Yeah.
And for you, it's
Well, my bread and butter is the squat.
Yeah.
That is it.
Mike,
Deadlift,
yours
not
is
so much.
For me, I think my best lift would be the deadlift.
Yeah.
I think so. You can,
Yep.
you lift the most there.
But
I feel the best
I
about it
like
there.
that you brought up that your girl Ashley was her name, correct?
Yes.
She was you said her as the example. So I think it's great that over the past couple of years that the stigma of getting bigger by using the barbell or just lifting heavy in general has kind of faded away.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing women who are some of the top women in the
aesthetic
strength
as
strength
heck.
sport, right?
Yes.
The women in the lower weight classes.
Valentine.
Yes,
Kimberly Valentine.
Age
Oh.
of Valentine.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Super freaking aesthetic. Heather
Aesthetic.
Connor,
Make
yeah.
squats.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Katie also, you know,
yeah.
from De Novo. I actually think she looks
Katie
great.
Ann, yes,
Katie Ann,
absolutely.
and Katie Ann is authentic. She says, I put weight on to get to this level, and then I didn't feel comfortable here, and so I maneuvered to this weight, and I really like that weight, and I like my street walking weight to be here. And I always told the girls, I'm like, hey, listen, if we're halfway through your dieting journey, and you're dieting down from 35% body fat, now's a great time for us to put some muscle mass on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have more mass, so what? We're going to be able to burn body fat and eat more doing it. And when you get finished with that cycle, we can cut just a little bit, and then we'll push you back up for your next period when we go back into heavy lifting. And so I feel like powerlifting is one of those awesome periods where you're like, okay, I'm not going to look at the scale.
Yeah.
I'm going to train hard as heck for 10 to 18 weeks, whatever, you know, your level is. For me, when I started, I had to do the full 18 weeks. And most people lift for several years before they do their first competition. I didn't do that, and I wish I would have. So.
Well, that's the nice thing about powerlifting is that you know, you don't develop those like issues from looking at the scale all the time. And
yes.
I see less powerlifters eating like a super strict diet than like some say like a bodybuilder or something.
Right.
So I feel like there's less chance of developing something like an eating disorder or just
Right.
some other kind of psychological issue.
You know,
And
it's-
also Mark Bell puts it really well. He says powerlifting is a sport for the rest of us, which I see
Right.
that as anybody can do it. And you don't have to be the strongest person, you don't have to be the biggest, most muscular looking person. All you have to do is be able to squat, bench and dead.
Yeah.
And you chase PRs, which can also be a little dangerous too. So I had to stop some of my girls and say, listen, I know you're really hungry for this 185 or this 225 or this whatever, but you're going to get injured because, again, you're natty.
Yeah.
You need to recover. You need to make sure you're sleeping. You don't get very good rest anyway. I had one in particular, a girl that was a nurse, and she was probably legitimately my hardest working power lifter.
It's like 3-day shifts.
Yes.
It's
So I would
insane, man.
never let her deadlift coming off of the long shifts, and I would always, you know, tell her, this is what we're
Go
doing,
bench.
and she'd get frustrated. Yeah, please go bench. Yeah.
Lay down for a
Need you to
little
lay
bit.
down.
Or I'd make her do accessory only that day while everyone else got to do their lifts, and then she'd be like, rah.
I'd be
And-
pissed too.
Yeah, but you know, it was awesome too, because then it was like, they all knew Elena's day was this day. We all knew we were gonna do our primary lifts on Friday together. Everybody cheered everyone on, and I loved that part because women are so catty in the gym for the most part that I feel like the power lifters, and even I see it with the Olympic lifting girls too.
Absolutely.
They have very good camaraderie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The camaraderie,
CrossFitter-
yeah.
Yeah.
CrossFitters
CrossFit,
too
yes.
now.
Mhm.
CrossFit and Olympic lifting, they try not to get in each other's way.
Yeah.
They're two different little subcultures. Powerlifting women, I think, were some of the most accepting, awesome, spirit building. I'm telling you, that group of women empowered me in so many ways. I went to my first competition, and girls I didn't even know were cheering for me.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best
That's
best
so
things
cool.
about powerlifting in general.
Yeah.
Is that the guys that I'm competing with are some of the guys that I train with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of those guys, they're stronger than me, but when I'm on that platform,
They are
cheering
cheering
for me.
you.
Yeah.
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 And that's what I love so much about seeing you guys at my gym too, because I look over and I'm like, I love that. I love that. So I look over and I think to myself, maybe someday I'll go back and rediscover powerlifting and go back
Well,
that
Kelli,
direction.
we're always
Is there
there.
a place for
You're
me?
more than welcome.
And a donut.
There's a platform
There's a
for you,
donut
and there's
and a
no
donut
platform.
waiting. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's move over into nutrition for powerlifting.
Yeah.
So what are some of the specifics or like things that people that are powerlifting should think about, as opposed to someone who's like, say, weightlifter, bodybuilder, or things like that?
Bodybuilding is such an aesthetic sport that I find that the narcissism and just, the body critiquing is something that I have to, as a coach, be really careful of. Where I have an awesome powerlifter guy, I'll use him as an example right now. He actually came to me 3 months ago. He was actually grossly under eating. He said, I want to get ready for my powerlifting meet. I want to be able to eat the most food and stay lean, right? So I'm like, well, here's the deal. You're lifting. Your expenditure is higher than 1.3, which is your resting multiplier, right? You're a 250-pound guy. Your expenditure is probably about a 1.5 or 1.6.
Gosh, a 250-pound guy who wants to be lean at 250 pounds.
Yeah.
That's
Can you explain
insane.
what you mean by that multiplier?
So usually if a person is at maintenance, it would be their weight times 10 times 1.2 to 2.2. At least that's the multipliers that I use. I like Eric Helms multipliers. I find them to be most accurate with when I reverse diet somebody and add food in slowly to their diet if they're under eating. That's usually close to where they'll be.
You know, it's crazy when I did this. Like, I did a rough calculation in my head. You said from 1.2 to 2.2. That's roughly where I'm stabilizing right now. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, it's a little off for certain people that are inactive. It's a little off, and I always know that. Like, if somebody sits all day and they go to Orange Theory for 45 minutes twice a week, I don't consider them a 1.5 multiplier. I'd put them at a 1.3. Because their job is rather sedentary. So with powerlifters, a lot of them are actually fairly active during their workday too. So you have to look at that. And I always look at what they're currently eating on average and how they've been training and how many days they've been training a week for what duration, because a lot of your guys' sets are rested sets and for resting a long time, right? But that doesn't mean that your metabolism is not working during that rest time. You're not burning calories, you are. So you do have to feed them for those long duration training sessions, which means for the guys that train in the morning, the day before is very, very critical. Their day before food is very, very critical.
Before bed.
Right.
See, that's why I eat right before I train.
I do too. The night before I train with Rigo, because I train early now, which is so unusual for me. I have one meal only before I train, where I used to have 3. The night before now, I've been telling him, he's like, man, you've got a lot of go in your tank. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've been backloading.
Backloading, yeah.
Yeah, I've been backloading. He's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I've been putting my carbs later in the day now. After I train, I've been eating a lot of my carbs. Post-training the day before, up to nighttime now. And he's like,
Might be a little something to that.
Right.
Yeah, because it's strange. I'm sure you guys have heard this concept before, where on your rest days you generally eat less. So what you're doing
Not
now
me.
is you're backloading. So on the days where you're training early in the morning, you want to be able to store up as much glycogen, or just in general,
Yes.
the night before, so that your training in the morning won't suffer.
And I also don't want to be super hungry, which if you're a good macro tracker, usually you divvy your meals up pretty darn close, right? For lifting, if you're lifting in the morning, I don't necessarily do that. I will have 2 more moderate meals and a larger meal at night with a little higher protein too, even because that next day I know I'm going to get the same amount of calories, but I need to utilize a lot of those around my training sessions. So if you could have a little bit more pre that's left over from the day prior, great. I notice a huge difference. It may be placebo. I'm hitting the same amount of calories every day, whether or not I'm training. I just push a lot of my carbs to the nighttime.
Closer to the nighttime.
Yeah.
Because
So
you're
that
training
I've
early
got
in
a
the
little
morning.
more glucose because I actually don't have a lot of carbs right now. Now, powerlifting, I had more carbs than I could ever want, and then some, because I really just kept increasing my carbs. I liked the way I felt. I liked the way I trained. Now, looking back on it, if I could go and do another one, I think I would have stuck a little bit closer to a 33, 34,
Split, yeah.
had a little more fat, just because it was my first time doing it. Now I know the way I perform on a little bit higher fat, and I would say that's probably something that I would do a little differently the next time maybe. And then I could cut fat a little to make weight, so.
Do you think it varies on whether people should utilize carbohydrates or fat more, or is there like a set thing?
Person specific. It's usually, so a lot of times people are actually cutting 10, 12 pounds for their meat. You do have to be mindful about that. So I always like to get the fats up as high as you possibly can in the reverse. That way you have a lot more to pull from, because you pull 5 or 10 grams of fat and the person's going to, especially if they're a guy, they're going to lose fairly quick off just a fat pull. We should keep those carbs as high as we can.
Yeah.
You know, and I was listening to the weight cutting system, Sigma Nutrition Radio, last week, and they were talking about that, and I think it was Mike T. Nelson, or maybe I'm wrong on that. Don't quote me on Mike T. Nelson. It might have actually been a different speaker. But they were talking about carb and fat utilization, and he said really what works for each person is very different. And I actually think, because I've monkeyed around with this enough with my clients and I have the data, I think a lot of people that start out as a sugar burner can be converted over to a moderate fat burner and still have pretty high carbs and feel very good and still feel satiated, but they are a little bit more satiated and better off with a little higher fat.
So you're saying that even if somebody does fairly well on the higher carb, you still switch them over to a little bit more moderate fat just because of the
satiation.
They feel a little bit more fuller.
Yeah. And the other thing is, a lot of powerlifters love to go out and have a meal out after they lift, or they want to, so it gives them a little more flexibility too. Now, a lot of these powerlifters don't macro track, and I don't understand that so much, but because how do you know what you're going to cut from if you aren't tracking, right?
I think it's because there's like a stigma, not so much a stigma, but just like a kind of thing surrounding. I think the camera's still rolling.
Okay, good.
Some stigma surrounding like macro tracking, like, oh, it's just for bodybuilders and stuff like that.
I think bodybuilding, to be honest, has more opposition to macro tracking than powerlifting.
Yeah.
I see macro tracking taking the reins because Lane Norton's done such a good job about, using that system for his lifters. De Novo Nutrition's using that. TNT is using that. I know Rich Wenner uses it. So all the people that I'm pretty comfortable, talking about in the powerlifting, they're tracking macros.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a great thing to take the stress off of you when you have to cut.
Yeah.
You know exactly what to do. If you've done it once or twice.
That takes out the guesswork.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why even before I started getting into the sport, I utilized macros and flexible dieting, just because it took a lot of the guesswork out of the equation.
It's awesome.
If my food stayed the same, if my exercise stayed the same,
if your water stays the same,
if everything stays the same, and I change one thing and something changes with
Yeah,
my weight, then
true.
I know it was that one thing that did it.
Yep.
Obviously you can't control for every variable,
But it's pretty close.
but you're minimizing everything, that could possibly go wrong.
Yeah.
You have this perfect equation, and again, Lord willing, the female has her cycle. I was so glad my Olympic weightlifting client this week started her cycle early, so she started it this week instead of the day of her comp, and I'm like, awesome.
That's actually a great point. How do you account, because you work with a lot of female clients, how do you account for the menstrual cycle when you're talking about whether it's weight loss or weight gain for competition?
Are there metabolic changes from that?
No, there really aren't. If a macro tracker has been tracking at energy balance for about, I usually do not take people that are under 6 to 8 weeks with me, because I can't test the variables in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I don't have enough time.
Yeah.
You could, but you don't have a cycle. So if your first cycle is going to be, the week of, then you're running a really tight time frame there. So I usually tell women, if I don't have you for 8 weeks and establish energy balance the first 30 days, we're going to try your water cut the first time that you have your cycle. Just so that in case you do magically have your cycle during the week of, and it happens, sometimes I'll have them, 3 days, 3 days back, because that's what their cycle's been, is it's always 3 days earlier or 2 days earlier. Just like with, my client this week, it was 6 days early. And I was really excited about that, because I'm like, great, you'll be done with it, and you'll be back into that sufficient hormone area coming out of your, cycle and into the week where you're the most strong and your hormones are the most optimal. So cool on that. So what I'll usually do is I'll have them dial in those variables at the end of the first month that they're with me. I'll say, okay, here's water load week. This is what we're going to do. We're going to increase your water by this amount this day, and then the next 2 days, and then I'm going to have you slowly taper, and I do it just like when they're going to weigh in for the meet. So I would have them cut the water at a certain time and look at that weight morning and night for the whole week to see how much variable there is there, morning to night, especially if they're going to fly. That's a whole different ball game, because a lot of times when they fly too, it's not so much the menstrual cycle, it's the food that they have available to them is very high sodium.
Yeah.
So I've had girls make mistakes and of course blame their coach, their nutrition coach, when all along I said, don't change your sodium intake when you fly.
What effect does the sodium have?
So if they're eating, 2,500 to 3,200 milligrams of sodium.
A lot of water, right? Yeah.
And they're on the plane and they don't drink water for 4 or 5 hours, and they get off the plane and now they're dumping the rest of their water, and they eat 5,000 milligrams of salt, and maybe they were a little bit shy on their water, they're going to hold water. So, and again, flying does affect that. And for competitors, like fitness competitors too, I know I always fly to a show on a Wednesday if I'm going to compete on Saturday, because I want to allow 72 hours for my body just to kind of, and that's not necessary. If you're super lean, you don't need to worry about it. If you don't have to make weight, you don't need to worry about it. But for people that are right there, or 3 or 4 pounds out, that's where it gets a little nerve-wracking for the athlete. I've only had 2 times where that's happened, and it was with Olympic weightlifters. And I think the biggest issue with that is not tracking everything, every variable, like you said, Jay. Because if you have a nutrition coach and you're filling in every box that's on my spreadsheet, which people do not do, there should be no real margin for error. It's pretty simple. If you actually tracked all your sodium, and again, MyFitnessPal has marginal error, so that's where I always tell people, I'm like, make sure when you're getting ready for a competition or a meet, or any kind of prep where you have to make a weight class, that you know approximately what your sodium is for these. And if you're putting the data in and there's no sodium reading, then you need to put the data in by hand, So it's just like with macros. You could be off substantially if you didn't really pay attention to it, so.
Yeah, see, so that's one thing that I didn't ever even consider was the sodium intake. Like I would track, the big things, the proteins, carbs, and fat. Yeah. But I never worried about sodium before.
Water is even more pivotal than sodium. So if their water intake is exactly the same every day, and again, I'm really, really a stickler about, I don't care how much water you drink. If it's a half gallon, drink a half gallon. That way when we load or when we increase, we are increasing from a baseline. Where if you've been between a half gallon and a gallon, that's 5 pounds difference. Yeah. A gallon is 10 pounds, right? So that can make a big difference. If you underdrink one day and drink more the next day, a lot of times the next couple of days you'll be a little heavier from that, the low day. It's the same thing with macros.
So would you suggest doing that even, so right now I'm using Avatar on the muscle gain phase. Would you suggest to me that even track my water and track my sodium just so that don't get so much fluctuation?
If it matters to you, water, if you hone in on your water, if you hone in on your water, you'll see most people, and I only say this because I have the data, most people only fluctuate about a half a pound to a pound a day if their water is perfect.
It's perfect, okay.
It's really not the biggest deal to monitor sodium, because if you're drinking the same amount of water, usually your body just regulates it anyhow.
Okay, naturally, all right.
Yeah. So that's the beautiful thing about hormones. We have a lot of negative things about them, right? But the beautiful thing about your hormones is, aldosterone, you pretty much will regulate within a day or 2. Yeah. So.
No, I'm definitely going to try that because with Avatar, it is an algorithm, right?
Yes.
So what you put in the system is what's going to determine your numbers for the next week.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to adapt to whatever you put in. So like I'm hoping that the more accurate I can be with everything, even the ones that they don't ask for, like the water, then I can give it a more accurate reading.
And fiber is the other thing. So that's the other area and even with men, I'll be like, If they're just within 1.5 pounds, I don't want to pull water and I don't want to pull any food. I'd rather actually just have them lower their fiber and take that bulk out of their stomach. So if you look at it, a lot of guys, they'll be going into the meat eating 40, 50, 60, 70 grams of fiber.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot of fiber.
I thought I was getting a lot of 30.
Yeah, 30 is like a low baseline for a lot of women, and I'm constantly on them about that because, again, more is not better with certain things, and fiber is one of those.
Fiber.
No, and they're like, I'm bloated. I'm like,
So
well,
we
if you
get
look at your fiber, it
constipated.
was 20 yesterday and 48 the day before. So you're bloated because you ate double the amount of fiber. So that's the other thing is, it's bulk in your stomach. It still has to pass the digestive system. So, I'll have them really watch that. I do that with my wedding girls also. If they're like, I just want to feel and look the best in my wedding gown the day of, and I'm like, okay, we're going to slowly lower your fiber. We'll do just a fiber supplement, like a Fiberlize or something like that, to keep you regular, but I want you to pull your vegetables out and anything that would make you feel bloated. Or it's a great thing to do, especially for fitness competitors too.
So that's like a really big light bulb that just went off in my head. It's
can
like
be 1 to 3 pounds.
a lot of people. We all know that the scale weight is a concern for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Who, not just competitors, but just people in general who wants to drop weight. The scale weight is very important. And they think that just doing their cardio and doing their exercise and tracking their food is going to be enough. Mm-hmm. So now you've told me several things that can affect it so much more.
Precision
The water
points.
intake can affect it greatly. The fiber intake can affect it greatly.
Oh, yeah.
Sodium can affect it really
Yeah.
a lot. And now, if you're a female, you throw your menstrual cycle on top of that,
You're in
and
trouble.
other factors like if you're flying, there's 5 things right there that can
yeah.
affect your scale weight immensely.
I used
that
to
you're
not
probably
sleep.
not accounting for.
When I had these people getting ready, I
Yeah.
used to just stay awake like, did you make weight yet? If not, we have to do this, and you'll make weight, okay.
So I'm guessing it's like you get a lot of inquiries like, Kelli, I'm hitting my macros, I'm training consistently, I'm doing my cardio, but my weight's not changing, and then I'm guessing you're asking, well, your fiber, your water, are you tracking water, are you tracking your sodium?
Normally I can look at the data and I'm like, oh, you slept 5 hours the last 2 days instead of 8.
Exactly.
Your cortisol's a little high.
Yeah.
Or let's go ahead and get 2 really good nights of sleep. Submit your data on the 3rd day and I'll look and see if your weight's down. Sure enough it is. And they're like, sorry. I'm like, it's okay.
Like, don't panic.
I want you to understand too
Yeah.
that you can look and see what I see, because part of learning, even like with powerlifting, part of learning what system works for you is being able to identify, oh my gosh, this is what pushed my weight up this week. Oh, I didn't hit my water goal yesterday. That's why I'm up a little today and probably tomorrow, or maybe not, because the body's so miraculous at recoil.
Yeah, and see, I think that's so great too that you're okay, so here's what happened, right?
Yep.
So you're not just their coach, you're basically teaching them
Educator.
to eventually become independent, so
Yep.
that when they do come off your program, they decide
don't
to
freak
move
out.
on, they don't freak out.
Nope. And
That's a
I tell
good
my
approach.
powerlifters, I'm like, there's 10 things right here. The top 5 are the things that most commonly make scale weight fluctuate. Please read the bottom 5 as well, because I know you guys like to enjoy life, and I want you to. This is sustainable, so we have to make it fun. Alcohol was number 6, number 7, and training volume number 8. And so all these things that are very pivotal, or things that I commonly see cause weight fluctuation, I give that to them ahead of time so that they're not just a complete neurotic head case about it. But I really do lay it out in the competition prep weeks that come. I always say, make sure that you do have some of the things that you've been eating while training that you trained really well off of when you fly. Make sure that, you have those ready for your pre-lift, and that you'll have some of the high quality things that you trained well off of for the low sodium portion if they're going to have to make weight. I like to have people training at 3 pounds out of their meet weight the week of, 7 to 10 days prior to the lift. There's no problem with it then.
Yeah. Because that's just the 3 pounds is just an easy water cut.
It's an easy water cut or a fat manipulation, which isn't going to affect things too much.
You said you pull 10 pounds, 10 grams of fat.
Even 5
Yeah.
for most people will make a significant difference. Or just drop the carbs a little, keep the fat in. Carbs are a carb and they hold water. It's 1 gram carbs for 3 grams of water. So you know if you do the math, you'll get them right. So most of my clients just weigh in about 0.25 to 0.5 under their weight, and they're usually at the top of the weight class. So we're always trying for that.
That's great. So you're not going to a meet and you're miserable.
Yeah, we're not in the middle, and we didn't have to cut, water at 6 p.m. the night before. A lot of times I'll just tell them, drink as much as you can, drink up until you go to bed. So you're not awake all night either, because that's the other thing. I want these people to go to bed and have a good night's rest, because you're going to lift better, well hydrated, well rested, well fed, excited.
Yeah. Oh, see, that's another thing. If you sleep the night before the meet and you're stressed, right? You don't get enough sleep. Your cortisol's up. Cortisol can help retain water, correct?
Sure, it can. And a lot of times when their coaches have them still at 7 or 8 pounds out the night before, I would never sleep.
Oh gosh.
Oh no, I would never sleep. You're not getting 1 hour out of me, because I'd be a nervous wreck if I was going to make weight or not. And so that's very careless. I have a lot of coaches that come to me for coaching on weight cut. And again, this is just something that I've done. It's all experience-based, and then, of course, just listening to the Sigma weight cutting system and some other coaches that I really respect. And their methods are all very different, which is awesome. But bits and pieces of those methods are what I think, you have to test. So you should have a test population bigger than one. You should have a test population of people, too, that maybe are not actually weightlifters, that you can just try this out with, so that you get really good at it. Maybe you recruit one of your macro clients that's just a really good macro client, and they are very accurate in every area, and then you ask them, hey, give you a free month, can I have you track these 4 areas for me, and we're going to do just a systematic cut. That's what I did. I would just give away free monitoring to some of my clients, just to use them as a guinea pig, because it's hard to find those top 10 clients that are tracking perfectly.
Yes.
I've got a lot of them, but half of my population.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of pick somebody off the street. It's like, hey, can you do this for me?
Can you please not go out to eat for the full month?
It's much better to just kind of get from your pool of clients, and okay, he or she's a really good macro tracker. If I wanted to test something, I can probably get a lot of accurate data out of them.
Yep. So why would you not want to cut? Like a lot of powerlifters, like, hey, I want to look a little bit leaner, and I'm like, you have a meet in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, but, and I'm like, can you wait until the meet's done? And then we'll get your central nervous system and get you through, deload if you're going to do that with your coach, and then we can cut. How's that sound? Like, why would you want to cut? I don't understand.
No, you know what? I think that's more of a problem with all of the younger powerlifters.
Yes.
Who are still going to college, who still want to look, they want to look jacked and tan, but they also want to be strong. I don't notice that with the older powerlifters.
No, the older powerlifters
the ones from
are
like the 25.
We want to win.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They care about their total. They care about their Wilks. We want to come in and win.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Like, one of the things I think too with women is, powerlifting gives them the opportunity to actually say, you know what, I don't care if I gain a couple pounds, because this is muscle.
Yes.
And if it's not, this is needed. It's necessary, because I'm not chasing a look in the mirror anymore, or a weight on the scale. I'm actually chasing PRs, and it just puts them in such a better mindset. And you do not get bulky from lifting correctly, breathing correctly, but you do need to have a good foundation. You've got to go to somebody solid that knows what they're doing, because I made that mistake when I first started. So, when I brought my program over to Rich Wenner, Coach Wenner, he was like, are you seriously doing this amount of volume at your age? And I was like, what? And he's like, no offense or anything, I'm 50.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at it from a scientific point of view.
Yeah, he was. And I was like, it's too much. He goes, Kelli, this is the amount of volume that a male 175 would do that is an intermediate lifter. You're a beginner.
And so when you brought him your program, was he?
Yeah.
Did he find a lot of fault in the volume in terms of the accessories that you were doing, or just in the main lifts?
The main lifts. And the accessory work, he was like, do your joints hurt? And I'm like, yes. And he's like, well, this is not created for a female. This is created for a male lifter. This is a male lifting split.
Intermediate.
intermediate male.
And you were coming to him as a beginner.
I was 3 months into powerlifting. I had just done my first powerlifting meet, and I was shot.
So can you give us so for our listeners, can you give us like sets, reps, intensity? What did this look like for him to go like, wow, this is not for a beginner female. This is for an intermediate 175-pound male powerlifter.
Okay, yes, I can. So this was the last of the 90 days that I had before my powerlifting meet. So they were 5s and 6s, right? 5 sets, very heavy. And then on my accessory work, it was like 10s and 12s for 5 sets.
Wow. So 5. So you were doing 5x5 or 5x6.
5x5
sets
or
of
5x6. Yep.
At like roughly around what intensity?
85% to 90%.
Oh my God, for 5?
For 5s and 6s.
Yeah.
And were you? You're
because
obviously,
again, this was 30 days before my comp, so nothing was below 75% at all. And I was just, it was crazy. I got through the first 60 days and I felt awesome, and then the last 30 days were just, they were heavy. And if you give me a program, I'm the type of person, and I know that a lot of women that get these programs are the same way I am. They're going to follow it to a T.
Yeah.
Even Rigo's like, whoa, I didn't know that you did this and this. And I'm like, it was on my program. And he's like,
I don't know high level lifters who work in the 90% range of their 1 rep max. And were your numbers based off of a one rep max?
They were, and he said, and I quote, "This is like Dan Green's workout."
Yeah.
Okay. And he goes, and Kelli, you are raw 100, no gear, belt only. Have you used your belt? And I go, yeah, on my 1 rep max.
So you haven't been using the belt at all in training?
My back was shot. My hips were hurting. So I'm going to just be very authentic about this. So probably a year went by, and my strength was just decrease. So I'm doing Rich's program, and I'm feeling better, and my lifts look better, and everything, and even like my body composition looked better, but my energy level was so low, and I couldn't figure it out. I just couldn't nail it. So
you're still trying to bounce back from that crazy program that you
right.
you had your hands on before you met Rich.
And this might have been the case before I started powerlifting too, that I was working off of what I knew was a slightly suppressed metabolism because of all the years of fitness competition, and going into something where, I was eating like 1,900 to 2,000 calories before I started powerlifting, and then at the highest 3,250 just to maintain my weight. And actually to keep me up over 140, I had to be well over 3,200.
So for a female audience, 3,250 calories, she was maintaining
my weight now.
This.
Yeah, this weight actually is exactly the same weight as I was for my meet. So, yeah, that was a lot of food. And I went to the doctor, and he goes, you know what, I'm going to run a female hormone panel on you. I go, okay. You think everything's okay? Like, I'm not in menopause or anything. He goes, no. You're not in menopause. No. And about a week later, I came back, and he's like, let me go over these results with you. And he's like, I don't know how you're so lean. You have low testosterone. And I was like, really? Well, that would explain why I went to pick up a 70 and it felt like a 15 the other day, And he's like, yeah, do you want to try?
Kelli is actually on steroids.
Yeah, I'm only half natty. So I asked, what should I do about this then? Am I going to have to go on, HRT? And he's like, let's give it 90 days and we'll see if, we treat the T4, the TSH was low alongside the test. And so I was really bummed because I was like, gosh darn it, I spent all these years rehabbing, doing macros, caring so much about getting my metabolism back in check, and I was eating a ton of food, and I was really lean, and how could my test be this low? And so I was like, I need to be really careful. So I backed off to 2 or 3 days of training a week, lowered my macros just a little bit down to about 2,500, and my training sessions were awesome, but I never really went back to lifting 5s and 6s again at 75 to 85% because
That's good.
I was terrified, about the hormone profile and just the broken body syndrome. Broken body syndrome.
Yeah, everything hurt.
Yeah,
Nothing
so you
felt
got to
right
be
in the
very
gym.
careful with who you hire. I will say this: I'm glad you guys do Lane's programming, and the Avatar Nutrition. You do Lane's programming,
Yes,
right?
PH3. Mhm.
Yeah. Because I think Lane is great because he's had injuries, so he gets it and he knows very well where someone should be in the beginner, intermediate phase, and he knows where they should be in their advanced phase because he's been there, but those are such different places to come from.
So on that vein of picking a good coach, how does someone what are some things that someone can look out for to know that someone is a good coach?
The longevity of the athletes that they work with.
I think that's the biggest. Yeah, that's definitely the biggest thing.
Injury,
you look at a coach's history, how many athletes they're currently training, their turnover ratio when it comes to their athletes, and I think is a very good indicator of how.
I'm a watcher in
that.
In nutrition with that. I'm a watcher in powerlifting, Olympic lifting, CrossFit, and it's really hard because I always look at the coaches that retain.
Yeah.
And their clients look good and they feel good and they're always hungry, to be better and better. And because you have an injury and you're just done.
Yeah.
And so I also look for the coach that isn't the most hardcore. The guy that screams and yells.
Yeah.
Now Lane himself, when he lifts,
he's an intense person, but he's not like that when he coaches.
No, he's awesome. He's calm. He's the center. He's really. I have a coach that actually coaches with me that has done his programming. He loved it. He also really loves Dr. Joe for his nutrition. And I'm like, you should go with who you feel has the best delivery of the message to you in the way that you need to hear it, and someone who has results.
Yeah.
And doesn't have a bunch of broken powerlifters.
athletes.
So I will say this, there are a lot of coaches in Arizona, and powerlifting's not a huge sport here.
No, definitely not.
It's not. And every time you see them, they have 10 new people. And you're like, what? Well, that's because the other 10 are broken.
Yeah.
That were at the last meet. And if they're not, and I say that generally speaking because...
Yeah, not to name any names,
No,
but
no.
I know a couple of coaches.
I do. I know them. And so what I love to see Bret Contreras doing his little strength groups in his garage, because a lot of these women are beautiful. They're not afraid to put on size. They're working really hard just to get a nicer set of buns or legs, but now they're into powerlifting because they see that powerlifting has built such an awesome base for so many people. Yes. So Healy, Carrie Northington. I know I started a girl. She's a really nice gal. I actually tried to get her to come to this today. Tessa Codina. She came to one of my boot camps. It was just a basic boot camp. She's a little powerlifter, a little natty. Started squatting and was just squatting a 35-pound body bar at first. And by about 6 months in, she was hooked on powerlifting. And then she wanted to do competitions, fitness competitions, and she was like, oh, I can't really do both of these at the same time. I'm like, no, because you don't have the muscle yet to do them both, but you will one day. And so it was really cool to see her. She actually programs with Coach Rich Wenner now too. To see her go and win this last meet, USAPL, because she's only about 127 pounds and strong as ever.
I feel like we've seen her.
Yeah, I'm sure you have.
Was she at the most recent Flagstaff meet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Yep, and she's a good little lifter for her weight, but she was only 19 years old when she first lifted that little body bar, and she was hooked. Didn't care that she had to put some weight on in the off season to build. She's been so graceful about it. She really encourages everybody. She lifted out of East Valley CrossFit for quite a while too, with the East Valley CrossFit crew with Laura Regal and Julie and Leslie Cook and those gals. So, and they're all USAPL girls. Nita, little Nita.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's been awesome to watch those ladies, because we didn't actually have a powerlifting class at the time. It was just a couple of us that would lift, and then August added that element to East Valley CrossFit. So they have a very good powerlifting team, And usually everybody's healthy, so.
And you know what too is that I think a lot of these girls are figuring out that powerlifting or just the barbell based movements in general
Yeah.
is just another tool for them to use.
Yep.
Like Lane talks about it all the time. That
Yeah.
all these things that I use, they're just tools in my toolbox.
Yeah.
I might not use one tool more often than the other, but that doesn't mean I can't use it. It's one tool that I can use to get the job done that I need to get done.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what a lot of people are realizing, the women especially.
Yes,
that
yes.
Them using powerlifting as a base, they can look better on stage.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's why I would say, you know, the more you incorporate all of the different elements,
Yes, all the
bodybuilding.
different elements.
I love bodybuilding. A lot of my clients are like, I just can't do it. I can't go to the gym and do these isolated movements, and I hate it. And I'm like, what? I love it. I love looking at things and going, oh, wow, there's a noticeable difference in the size of this, that's awesome, or the shape. Where with powerlifting, like, my strength was really very good, and I did notice differences in my legs and glutes, but they were more like subtle and gradual, where with bodybuilding, I feel like you really do start to see the fine details. Because the lifting is different.
Mm-hmm.
The style is different. Tempo contrast can be different. You can do that also with squat, bench, and dead.
Yes.
Different tempo contrast,
Mm-hmm.
rack pulls. So when I say rack pulls, a lot of times my clients are like, deadlifts? And I'm like, no,
No.
a rack
It means
pull.
rack pulls off the rock.
Yeah, rack
Different
city.
from block pulls.
Rack city. Yeah. And then they're like, oh,
Yeah.
it's the 3/4 movement. I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, it is. And if you're not good at that, then why are you going
Why are you
to
pulling off from the
why are
floor?
you pulling off the floor? Right. So then they start to like systematize everything, and they're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing conventional deads if I can't do RDLs well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's why I think bodybuilding and powerlifting and even Olympic lifting, you know, they're great if you incorporate them at the right
Yeah,
time.
sparingly. Exactly. Like
Yeah.
if you're somebody who competes in bodybuilding, you don't train the Olympic weightlifting movements 365 days a year.
No.
No, you might incorporate them during your active recovery days, you know,
Yep.
when you're not prepping for a show.
Right?
But it's like you use them sparingly, right?
Right.
You use the tool that's necessary for the time and moment that you need it.
Yep.
But then when you're now in prep mode, then that's where your energy needs to go to.
Yep.
Now your energy needs to go in your bodybuilding training, not
Yeah.
your Olympic weightlifting training.
Yep. And most people don't struggle with the training so much as they struggle with the nutrition and the prepping. So, you
Staying
know.
on track.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, people are like, "What? You do nutrition?" And I'm like, it's still the hardest part
It's
to
the hardest
me.
part.
It is the hardest part.
It is. Yeah.
And it takes so much discipline. It'd be so much easier just to go out and eat and say, "Oh, I hit my macros." "Oh, did you?" "Oh, you didn't." You know? "Oh, did you?"
Did
No.
you really?
"You didn't."
Like how many macros off are we talking?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So
20 to
if
30% probably.
20 to 30% for protein, carbs, and fat. Damn.
Yeah, and you know what? A lot of people are like, "Well, you're much better at eyeballing than most people." That's true.
That's true, but that comes with experience, correct?
It does, yeah.
You know, you don't eyeball things and you magically know what that is.
No.
You track a tablespoon of peanut butter. You track 4 ounces of chicken
Yep.
for years,
Yeah,
and then you're like, you see a 4-ounce piece of chicken, like that's what a 4-ounce piece of
Right.
chicken looks like.
yeah.
So for something like that, where like Jay just said, it takes years to understand how to do this intuitively.
Oh,
How do you, as like a coach, how do you demonstrate that value to someone to stick with this? Like, how do you say, hey, this is going to take a lot of time, however, it's going to be worth it?
usually a lot of the people that come to me are personal referrals, and their friends are like, "Hey, it's going to take 30 days to get even like to the place where you're not actually wanting to throw your MyFitPal out the window on the drive." Right, but what I typically do is I give them my FAQ form, and it goes over the rigors and most of the things that cause a lot of frustration, which I'm going to be honest, most of it's database related, because a lot of times the database is incorrect, so it'll make their numbers look skewed at night, or they don't know how to fill their macros at night. Most coaches won't do that for them. So I just tell them, listen, this is what I do full time. I'm going to handhold you. Really, the only way I think a lot of people can track macros very accurately is if they have somebody to say, nope, that's the right way. just like with grams and ounces.
Yeah.
You know, my clients all weigh out their food in grams cooked because I want to prep them for when they're going to go out to the restaurant. And usually at the restaurant, they're going to look at the cooked meat in ounces and go, that's 3 ounces, so it's 100 grams, or it's 3 ounces, so it's 90 grams, lean ground beef. And they can start doing the conversions in their head. That way they can look in their database and they go right to the cooked data for that food. So a lot of the issues that I see with not being a good macro tracker in the beginning are being impulsive. You know what? I got invited to go out to eat tonight. I'm going to do it tonight. Yeah. And then by the end of week 1, they're like, I didn't lose weight. Dang it. Is it because...
It's not working.
Yeah. But they never...
Your macros aren't working.
Yeah, they never say that to me because of the literature that I deliver them in the beginning that's like, I want to see 30 days at 90% or better tracking. Yeah. If you don't have 30 days right now, don't sign up right now. And if you're going to go, and if you travel for a living, you get started right away because it doesn't matter what 30 days you start with, you have to learn the hard way how to track through all those traveling experiences. Yeah, I almost think my travel trackers are the best trackers because they learn every single thing like they've been shot out of a cannon.
Yeah,
you know?
You kind of just throw them into it and they kind of have to grow wings on the way down.
They do. And, you know, they're like, oh, hey, coach, I took a picture of the menu, and here is the actual salad, and here's what's on it. It looks like about 2 ounces of this. So then I just break it down for them. This is how you would macro this out. These are the totals.
So you have them send you pictures of
yeah.
what they... Mm-hmm. And do you do that for the whole 30 days? Or?
I do it forever, for as long as they're with me. Because a lot of times...
So long as they need it.
So long as they need it. Yeah. Now, they become very good because they're like, oh, cabbage, this looks like 2 ounces or, 20 grams or whatever it might be. And they'll put everything in by hand into their database, and then they just macro every element of that.
How long does it usually take until they stop sending you pictures?
About 15 days, maybe a month. Yeah. And once in a while, they'll go to like a wine tasting where they'll have several different wines and a 3-course meal, and they'll take pictures of the 3-course meal and say, this is what I came up with. Does this look right? And I'm like, you're close, but I would actually go a little bit higher on those fats. Okay. Yeah. So just put it in as one meal, dinner out tonight or anniversary dinner. Put your macros here and your calories are this. And so then they learn how to be very efficient with their meal out.
You know, wine tasting, that 2 ounces might turn into 4.
Yeah.
And, I was going to say, you're not supposed to drink the wine anyway, right?
My clients are so crazy. They bring like their food scale. I'm like, you brought the food scale?
Oh gosh, that's
what?
Epitome of being neurotic.
Yes, yes. But to some of them, they are seeing such great results that they'll go to that length. And it's amazing to me. I'll do like my travel live sessions in my house, and I'm like, this is the suitcase, and here's where I put all my meat, and they do the exact same thing. They're like, hey, this worked great. I froze all my meat, put it in my suitcase. I had the refrigerator at the hotel, and it got me through the whole weekend. I'm like, cool. Did you have your meal out every night? Yep.
They're doing baggage inspections. It's
yeah.
Like, why do you have
I get inspected every time. Every time.
That's hilarious.
And the guy's like, wow, you're serious business, huh? I'm like, yeah.
Like, yeah, you betcha.
He's like, oh, geez. And I go, yeah, I have like, to not look like a total weirdo. I'm like, yeah, I have, Crohn's disease, so I have to be kind of careful about, what I eat. They're like, oh, are you a type 2 diabetic? And I'm like, never mind. just let me get through, know. But now...
I promise there are no weapons inside this piece of poultry.
No, there are not. Yeah. No. Now, the protein powder, on the other hand, I've had swiped a few times. So they've taken some things that
That's why you just don't take vanilla.
That's right.
Let's not take chocolate. Like,
this is good.
Yeah. This is chocolate cocaine.
Yes. Yeah, chocolate cocaine today, right? Yeah.
So we have about 4 or 5 minutes or so.
Oh, jeez. Always run out of time.
I know. Last thing I just wanted to ask is, for Gen Pop people that aren't necessarily like powerlifters or anything like that, do you think they should count macros?
Yeah, I do. For the most part, I think because, like we were talking about with Dr. B last couple weeks back, obesity is 1 out of 3 people in America is obese. Mm-hmm. We're now seeing it in our youth. I really think that if we're going to change the way that the youth are, we have to start with the grown-ups. So I do think Gen Pop people that are going to the gym that want to stay focused should track their macros, because it's about 80% of their success right there. What you're doing in the gym, it's kind of like Jay and I were talking about before we started. You can't out-train your crappy diet. You can't out-cardio it either, because a lot of times you don't realize it and you're just exchanging carbs for calories.
Yeah.
You're not exchanging fat, and you might even be exchanging your muscle.
Yep.
So if you track, there's way less margin for error. You will be moving closer to your goal instead of going 2 steps forward and 1 back, or 1 forward and 2 back, and chasing your tail, because I did that.